Oh, lovies. It's David McGillivray here, comedy legend, horror icon. I'm here with another edition of Little Did You Know. It's a chat show in which I talk to people I find interesting, and I do it both here on YouTube and on Patreon. If you're a subscriber, you can join us as soon as we finish chatting. Look forward to seeing you then. If you're not, here's the link. Please consider saying hello. It's Easter, and to prove it, look, there's a daffodil. Oh no, wrong side. Outside my window, which is rather charming. My guest today. What can I say about him? Oh well, wait a minute. Let's just read what's on the back of his book. He's simply a national treasure, one of the great comedians of the last 40 years.
Oh,
Well, I wouldn't say no. I agree with that. What have I written about him? Oh, here's something I wrote 20 years ago. He's our best old style joke teller. By now, you must know it couldn't possibly be anybody else. Will you please say hello to the very wonderful Barry Cryer?
hello all. I deny being a comedian.
You've always said this, Baz. You've said to me in the past, you don't even write jokes. Do you stand by that?
I'm an old writer who tells jokes and stories and sings songs, but comedians are something else. I worked with a lot of brilliant men and women through the years, and they had that indefinable originality, funny bones. And I was good at what I did. I was the co-writer, the stand-up, and the warm-up man and everything, but I wasn't their league. But on the other hand, I was jack of all trades and complete the expression. I was all over the place.
Oh, well, yes, you and me both. Jack of all arts, master of very few, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for making that distinction. You're joining us. Thank you very much on a bank holiday. What else have you got planned for the rest of the Easter weekend?
Um, there are exciting moments. I have my ritual walk, and I might go to Tesco's, David. This is the high point of the day. My wife and I, here he goes. You'll get used to me making endless connections. My wife and I were in Morrison's a year or two ago, and I never forgot this. There was an older couple, listeners talking, an older couple walking past me, and she said, as she passed, she said to her husband, "Only two more items." And they're quite small. She almost had a skip in her step as she said it. And as he went past me, he said, "The excitement builds." And I thought, what a wonderful line to hear in Morrison's or any supermarket. The excitement builds.
Little things do mean a lot now in lockdown. Baz, and I know you're an eavesdropper. I'm going to mention this later in the program. Now, I know that you haven't got much truck with that bothersome email, and yet here you are on navigating Zoom. How has this been achieved?
With our son, Dave, who's in an adjacent room as I speak. And I'm a neo Luddite. I can't cope with technology at all. And Dave, our son, and Tony, two of them, they get us through all this. And, we're all Zoomed. We're all Zoomed, I tell you.
La-
And Dave's done this today, and you've got Tom there.
we need yes, men in the background. Yes.
Yes.
Last time we spoke, I remember you telling me that even part of the last series of I'm sorry, I haven't a clue was recorded on Zoom. How was that for you as a Luddite?
It was a bizarre experience. It was non-visual like we are. You could hear your mates. You couldn't see them, obviously. And the audience were all at home. So there was a strange sort of slightly different air to the laughter, if you got it. And our producer, John Naismith, said, if you do a line or something, do wait. There'll be a fractional pause before they laugh. So you waited, and sometimes there wasn't a laugh. No, it was quite grotesque. Sandy Topstreet was hilarious. She just said, "This is adjectival chaos."
Well, a little bird tells me, one of the panelists on Just a Minute, that part of their last series was done back in the BBC Radio Theatre. No audience, of course, but everyone was at least back in the same room. Is there a chance that that will happen with the next series of Clue? Have you heard?
No, who knows? It's completely unknown at the moment what's going to happen next time.
Ah. We wait in with bated breath. Now, talking of Clue, reminds me that not so long ago, I paid tribute to one of the writers on Clue, and this is what I said on Facebook, talking of me as one who has struggled to hone an innuendo. I bow to a master of the craft. Yes, Ian Pattinson, who
Yes.
died in February. What a special skill he had.
He was an amazing man. I don't think he's talked about enough when people get on the subject of script writers and so on. The man was brilliant, but in quite a narrow field. He did us, and I saw him on the credits of an old Would I Lie to You last night. But also, I say this with great pleasure. Cheers, Ian. We all said he's the rich one. He'd been an executive with Shell going round the world, and he had a massive payoff. And so he could turn stuff down or say, "No, I don't want to know. I'm not interested."
I never knew that.
Yes, we used to make fun of him. He loved it. Oh God, it's the rich one, we used to say. A rich script writer.
Unheard of, yes.
Yeah.
But the innuendos, I mean, we're talking classics. They often, for those who haven't heard the program, revolve around somebody called Samantha. Now,
Yes.
a lot of these Samantha jokes have all been archived. You can listen to them on YouTube, and they're just wonderful. But something occurred to me, which was that this stuff is going out at 6:30 in the evening. Did BBC high ups ever say to you, "No, I'm sorry, you've gone too far with that one"?
Oh, it happened more than once. I mean, it would probably be categorized as misogyny or something now. And Ian and all of us said, "No, she's always the winner." And we were informed there was one particular line that Samantha did. There was a complaint, a complaint. And our producer, John Naismith, was virtually summoned, to the BBC. And he went along with Jack Dee, the chairman, and Emma Darrell, our mate, the agent. And the woman at the other end thought, "Oh no, he's brought Jack Dee and he's brought Emma." She felt outnumbered and in trouble. And I always say an archaeologist once found our producer's heels. He digs them in so much. And they went for her and they abandoned the complaint. And as Ian always said, she wins. She is the winner in all these situations. But oh, no, no, no. I always say if you got the joke, you can't complain about it because you were on the wavelength, weren't you? I heard they played a clip in a tribute to Ian recently, and he would do brilliant jokes about the town we were in because we were always on tour, and do his homework and research. And he was in Nottingham, and Jack Dee said to the audience, Nottingham was originally called Snottingham with an S, and the S was dropped and it became Nottingham. The people who live in Scunthorpe are very apprehensive. Now you leave it. Do you get it or don't you?
Thank you, Ian Pattinson.
Oh, cheers, Ian.
Cheers, Ian. We're going to move on to you now, Baz, and your book.
Oh, good gracious. Look at that. Oh, it's overdoing it.
I'm
Didn't know he was still with us.
Isn't it marvelous at his age? I'm going to start on page 14, Baz, because this is something that your old mate, writing partner, the late Ray Cameron, said of you. According to you, he said, "I wish just once I could mention something that doesn't remind you of something else."
And I said, funny you should say that. And he said, shut up. I make these endless, probably maddening connections. And Vicky Coren, who's a dear friend, does only connect. And if I ever did, in the unlikely event of me being offered a program, I would want to do one about connections. And I thought, what would I call it? And I thought I'd call it Thinker Link, because everything reminds you of something else and it drives people mad.
That's why we'll have no trouble thinking of things to talk about on this show, Baz. You're a Leeds lad. You studied at Leeds University. You also saw some comedy greats at often at Leeds Empire, and we're talking about true comedy greats here, including Laurel and Hardy. Now, not so long ago, there was a film about them, Stan and
Yes.
but you saw Laurel and Hardy themselves. You've got a first-hand account. How wonderful!
Yeah. The recent, fairly recent film, Steve Coogan and John C. Reilly were absolutely brilliant. But being an old bore, the writer played around with the facts, what happened when, and the portrayal of Bernard Delphont, the impresario, was just ludicrous. But neither here nor there. You see, I'm wandering off again. Yes, Leeds Empire Theatre, we queued round the block. They were the Beatles before the Beatles. We couldn't believe what was happening. It was Laurel and Hardy. And their film career had wound down after a long, brilliant career in silent and then sound. And I think those two great men thought, well, we've had a great time, we're has-beens. And the brilliant Bernard Delphont thought, Laurel and Hardy, would that work? And when they got off the ship in Southampton, there were hundreds of people there. So anyway, getting back to Leeds, so there we were, and there was a very good supporting bill. They were the second half after the interval, and the band suddenly went, oh, they almost got an ovation before they came on. The very music. And then these two men came on the stage and the place erupted and they hadn't done anything. I mean, they didn't have to do anything. It's like, it's a personal appearance. We just know it's them.
And what I found particularly moving is that you remember Ollie crying.
I remember.
Ollie crying.
Oh, yes. I noticed it. I was near the front. There was a tear trickling down his cheek, and I thought, oh, what? And they said it happens quite often because he can't believe what is happening, that are on a stage in front of an audience. And it was very moving. Ray Allen, the ventriloquist, was on the bill with them, and he was in awe of them. And in those days, not a selfie in those days, but he said, I wonder if I could have a photograph. Certainly. And it didn't happen. And 2 or 3 days went by, and Ray thought, oh, I'll leave it. And he said, I was in a little dressing room under the roof. Suddenly I heard these thudding footsteps. Oliver Hardy, overweight and not well, came all the way up to Ray's dressing room to give him a photograph. He wasn't summoned to their dressing room to receive it. And he was so touched by that. He thought, they were just great, he said.
And I can imagine that, yeah, that's something that he would never have forgotten. How wonderful. We're going to get back to innuendo as well, because you also saw the cheeky chappie, Max Miller. Not only that, but then later you were able to work with him. Now, this is page 122 of your book, Baz. Do you remember that Max Miller was going to try and get away with on Midday Music Hall?
Yes, the Playhouse Theatre. I was lucky. I was in a show called Espresso Bongo at the time. Oh, listen to him. But this was a lunchtime live recording. Come on, get your act together. Live show, lunchtime. And I arrived and they were using a dressing room. I thought, dressing room for radio, what's that about? And the great Max Miller was top of the bill. And he was going to wear his full stage costume. And I was sharing this room with him. I thought, oh, it's him. Can't work in ordinary clothes, son, he said. And we chatted away. I thought, it's him, it's him. We went to the tea bar and I treated him to a cup of tea. We shared a cigarette and goodness knows what. And then there was the run through. We had to run through what we were going to do. And he had a bit of paper with some scribbling on it. And the producer, Bill Worsley, I've remembered his name. And he was sitting there and we're all going, oh, Max is going to run through his act. And he ran through it. And at one point, he did a joke. And he said, this, in the days when buses had conductors and conductresses, all that. This bus breaks down. Driver says to the conductor, don't ring the garage, I'll fix this. He goes down the front, got his head under the bonnet, fixing it. 10 minutes go by, passengers are getting restless. Conductor went down the front and said, can I help? Do you want a screwdriver? He said, no, we're 10 minutes late already. Now then, now in those days, Bill Worsley buried his head in his hand and said, Max, are you going to do that joke? I don't know. See how we go. So we all went off to Sherlock Holmes pub before we were going to do the broadcast. And the Ray Ellington Quartet were also on the bill. And Ray Ellington came up to Max. I think it was, my goodness, a £5 note he put on the bar. And Max said, what? He said, I'm betting you don't tell that joke. So Max opened his wallet and we all did the joke about moths flew out and the bet is on, he's got to tell that joke. So you can imagine the atmosphere in the actual show when Max went on the side, it was crowded with the rest of us. He's got to tell that joke. And he did his act and then he sang his final song, Mary from the Dairy, goes on. Never told a joke. We go back to the pub. Ray Ellington came up to Max Miller and said, come on. What? You never told that joke. I was going to. They flashed that bloody light at me. He would not pay up on the joke.
It ought to be pointed out that Max Miller was notoriously mean. Yeah.
Yes, but I can balance the picture. He told me once, I'm not buying drinks for 11 strangers. And he was renowned for it. But I found out in his hometown, Brighton, he owned a lot of property in Brighton, very well known locally. He would go to the magistrate's court on a Monday morning wearing glasses and a hat, looking quite anonymous. And he'd pay the fines of poor old tramps and vagrants. So there was a side to him that the locals found out. And he was marvelous doing local work for charities. So they knew what Miller was like under that mean image. And of course, when Roy Hudd started out in the business, he did a double act with a mate of his, and they were in awe. Max Miller was the top of the bill. And twice nightly, 2 shows that night. Between the 2 shows, the great Miller said to them, come on, we're going to the bar. Let's have one. So they go to the bar, but Max didn't go up to the bar. He sat down. So they sat down with him and Roy thought, what is going on? And Max was chatting away. Then the audience start arriving in the bar who've come for the second show. And Roy's just about to say to Max, what are you drinking? And somebody shouted out, Max, what are you drinking? He said, large scotch. What do you two want? And he said to them, let them buy, gives them a thrill. So it's fascinating, underneath the stage persona of the man.
Two sides to everybody, of course. What strikes me, Baz, is that you can drop names, obviously, like nobody else, but they vary so much. So you tell anecdotes about everybody from, and this is literal, it's in your book, Thora Hird to Richard Pryor.
I know I can't believe it myself. Lucky or what?
We're going to mention both of those people in the second part of the program, but just before we take a little break, while we've been mentioning music hall, the other lovely thing I remember from your book, Baz, from the music hall days, this was not a music hall great. It was a tap dancing duck.
Yes.
Can you tell us the story? I think you called him Monty.
Tap dancing duck. There was a man who had a brilliant bird act with birds on tightrope and trapezes and goodness knows, it was just superb. But the triumphant finale was a duck tap dancing on a biscuit tin. I know it sounds bizarre, but it did actually happen. And you couldn't believe what you were seeing. The band played and the duck tap danced. And I used to watch it nearly every night. I was fascinated. And one night, it was a complete anticlimax. The great moment came, the band played, and the duck just stood there. Duck didn't even waddle, just stood there. Complete anticlimax, very embarrassing. And I said to the guy who did the act out to us, "What happened with the duck tonight?" He said, "Oh, the candle went out." There was a candle in the tin underneath the duck, and the duck would hop about madly because of the heat. I expose him now.
I love it. I love it. Barry, we're going to talk lots more in just a minute, but right now we're going to take just a little break because we like to know what our friends at Peccadillo Pictures are doing. So please have a look at a trailer for this film. It's called I Got Life. Please join us again in a couple of minutes.
I'll be back shortly.
C'est bon? Tout le monde est là?
C'est bien, c'est bien. Ouais, c'est bien. Pour notre grande professionnelle Samantha, le bar, ok?
Mais je m'appelle pas Samantha, je m'appelle Laurent.
Ah, et puis Samantha, ça fait un peu plus rêver quand même, hein? C'est que t'es en train de passer d'abeille à reine des abeilles.
Bah tiens, regarde lui. Je sais qu'il a 20 ans de plus qu'elle. Pas avec les enfants?
Quoi?
Bah,
Vous êtes qui,
je
madame?
suis qui, moi?
Oui,
Je
oui.
suis qui, moi? Tiens, regarde, tu vois ta bague, ta bague de merde, là. Tiens, regarde. Tiens, bah voilà. C'est qui? Je sais pas. Ça fait du bien.
T'es complètement folle.
Ah, il faut qu'on divorce aussi, tiens, j'y pense. Excuse-moi, je pensais pas que ça te ferait autant d'effet.
Mais non. C'est la ménopause. Ça va, oh.
Et hop! Et puis après, à 50 ans, hop! On est jeté!
C'est bon, là, ton petit cul en cuir, là. Pardon, madame.
J'ai un truc à dire, maman.
Là, maintenant?
Je suis enceinte.
Quoi, déjà?
Allez.
Oh, ça alors.
C'était qui? Le mec de mes 18 ans. Quand le stock se vide, eh ben, c'est le début du bordel.
That's a film called I Got Life. I'm David McGillivray, and with me is my very special guest, Barry Cryer. Baz, we were talking before the break about some of your memories, and I mentioned the fact that you can share anecdotes about everybody from Thora Hird to Richard Pryor. So I'm going to test you. Do you remember what Dame Thora used to say to you on the phone?
Oh, well, we had a sort of run. She'd suddenly launch into a diatribe on the phone for no apparent reason. "Where were you in Grimsby last week? I was there. There was no sign of you." I said, "I told you I couldn't make it last week." And anybody overhearing would say, "Oh dear, what's happening here?" Bless her heart, when she was in the wheelchair later, I was invited to a lunch for her and everything. And I walked in and she's there in the wheelchair and she said very loudly in front of everybody, "He's not sitting next to me, is he?" And I said, "Oh, charming, charming." Some haven't some of us haven't forgotten that weekend in Whitby. She said, for which I paid, incidentally. I said, oh, listen to her, me. And, oh, God, people are going, this is awful. And then they realized what it was. Oh, I loved her. We used to do this double act the minute we spotted each other.
And you rang her up one time, and before a word was exchanged, she said, "We've had the sex. I suppose you'll still want to be friends."
Yes. Anybody bugging these phone calls must have been stunned. Oh, and there was a thing we did on a show where it was a charity appeal. And the person doing the appeal was in front of the camera, right in close up. And they talked about older people who have lost touch with what is going on and are not in tune with the times and everything. And at the end, the camera pulled back to reveal that behind them were a load of judges in full robes and wigs, you know, older people who've lost touch and everything. And somebody said to me, you know Thora Hird, don't you? I said, yeah. He said, Thora would be perfect for this. So I rang her and she said, well, going to send me a script? I said, obviously. Thora's interested. Oh, great. So they sent her the script, and then she rang me and she said, I think it's very funny, but it's not me. I don't think I can handle this. So I rang her back and said, Thora doesn't want to do it. They said, oh dear. Now, you can't imagine it happening now, David. They said, she's got the only copy of the script. I am not making this up. So I ring her and said, can you send the script back? She said, I've torn it up. And she actually put it together with sellotape and sent it back. From now on, that is the joke. We'd send each other Christmas cards and everything. We'd torn them in half and stuck them together with sellotape. We were at an oldie magazine lunch once, and she tore a bit of paper up and sent it over on a saucer. And I had to put it together. What do you think of the potatoes? And I asked for a piece of paper and wrote, mind your own business, and tore it. I know it sounds pathetic, but oh, I do miss her.
Well, I bet.
You knew the game was on as soon as you were with Thora. Something's going to happen. And she loved doing it. And I loved her doing it in front of other people. There was an audience there going, oh, God, they're having a row. And it was wonderful.
As we know, you've written for a lot of great comics, but what I like especially is that you've written inadvertently for none other than Alan Bennett. It's something else we wouldn't have expected.
I never wrote for Alan, but we're both from Leeds. I was at Leeds Grammar School, he was at Leeds Modern School, and we never met until we're both in London, and he was beyond the fringing, and we became friends then. And we'd always, to this day, in this text and email age, I'm a telephone animal. To this day, if I ring him, he says, come on, joke. He wants a joke or something I've overheard. Years ago, I did an after dinner on a Friday night, as I remember, and there was a woman there and said, what are you doing tomorrow? You getting the train? And I said, well, yes. And she said, you live in Hatch End in Middlesex. She said, we live in Ruislip, which is, we'll give you a lift home tomorrow. You can cancel your ticket, whatever. I said, oh, thank you. So the next day I'm with her and her mate in a car going back, and they're going to drop me off at home, which is great. And they're chatting away. Now, in those days, I think it still applies, I don't know, business people had these charity things, Rotary and Round Table and everything. And I'm sitting in the car and she's saying to her mate that her husband, Bruce, he's got lumber this afternoon. He's towing a paper dragon down the high street in Ruislip. And her mate said, how did he get lumbered with that? And she said, he's the only round tabler with a tow bar. I thought, Alan Bennett's going to hear this. So I rang him, told him the story, and I said, he's the only round tabler with a tow bar. And Alan doesn't laugh, he groans. Oh, oh, oh. So that was that. About 3 months go by, and the BBC rehearsal rooms at North Acton were known as the Northampton Hilton. And I was there working with Russ Abbott or something, and I'm waiting at the lift to go up to the canteen. And the lift doors open and Alan stepped out and he didn't even say hello. He looked straight at me and said, "I'm the only round tabler with a tow bar." He loved the lines.
It's so obviously an Alan Bennett line, and you
yes, exactly.
Yes. We've got to talk about your great mate Ev, Kenny Everett, because I know that was a long and very happy relationship. But here's something else that perhaps people, well, I'm sure people won't know about the fact that there was a brief period where you were going to write a script for Stanley Kubrick.
It was one of the great if-onlys. Ray Cameron, my mate, father of Mike McIntyre, we wrote for Kenny Everett. We were joined by other writers as time went on, but we created the show initially with Kenny. And Stanley Kubrick had the film The Shining coming out, and they were going to do radio promotion. And Kubrick had apparently said, "I don't want the cliche. I don't want some guy saying The Shining," he said. And he'd heard Kenny Everett on the radio. That's who I want. Meanwhile, we had written a film script for Kenny, Suicide the Movie, a comedy about a man who, whatever happens, when people come at him, he threatens to kill himself. So they go, "Oh, let him do it." And he becomes a great success because of this. And we shot a test reel with Joanna Lumley, I remember. And then Everett says, "I can't believe it. Mr. Kubrick wants to have tea with me." So he goes off to have tea with Stanley Kubrick. And Stanley Kubrick said, "What are you doing at the moment, Kenny?" He said, "My chums have written me a film called Suicide the Movie." And he started telling Stanley Kubrick about it. And Stanley Kubrick said, "I want to read it." And it was like, maybe he wanted to do a comedy. He hadn't done it since Dr. Strangelove or whatever. Dear Ev turns up, back, turning cartwheels. "Mr. Kubrick wants to know about our film." And Ray Cameron said, "Well, he's not having it." I said, "What?" He said, "It won't be ours anymore." I said, "Who cares? It's Stanley Kubrick," but it never happened. So one of the great if-onlys.
Well, you did do a film with Kenny Everett, though. It's called Bloodbath at the House of Death. And again, another little bird tells me that that is coming out on DVD and Blu-ray. So you heard it here first. You're a wonderful name dropper, as we've already established, Baz, but I put it to you that nobody could name drop Terence Stamp and Princess Diana on the same page.
The same table. Went to a lunch, and husbands, wives, partners are going to be on separate tables. My darling Terry had flu, so she didn't come. I arrived with Gerald Scarfe and his wife and everything, and we're a bit late, and oh God, and we rushed in, and they showed me to a table, picked the names up as they thud. There's Princess Diana. I'm sitting next to her. "Hello." Barry cried, "Hello, Barry." And I introduced myself, and she said, she didn't ask if I was married or anything. She said, "Where's your wife?" I said, "She couldn't come. She's got flu." "What's her name?" I said, "Terry." That was that. And I looked, and I couldn't believe it. At the same table was Terence Stamp. And when he was a young drama student on the musical espresso bongo, we all wore jeans and T-shirts. He was virtually our dresser and assistant and used to iron our jeans and everything. I thought, I won't say, "Do you remember?" But it did crop up later on in the conversation. Anyway, time goes on, and Prince Charles speaks, and she said to me, "I bet you wanted to go home, you know." And I curbed the impulse to say, "Your place or mine." And it had been over 2 hours since I'd mentioned my wife's name. And Diana reaches under the table, picks up this big bouquet of flowers they'd given her, and said, "Give those to Terry." She remembered the name after all that time. I said, "But I can't go before you two." "Oh, forget it," she said. So I crept out, and I'm on the tube with this big bouquet of flowers. I get home, my darling's in bed with a cup of coffee, and I lobbed the bouquet onto the bed and said, "Diana sent you these." And Terry said, "Oh, piss off." True story.
Two stories for the price of one.
Yes.
We love it. I also love the fact that you used to get mixed up with Barry Took, also
Oh, yeah.
a comedy writer, and the stories are just legion. It didn't. I mean, it didn't happen once. It happened many times. People thought Barry Took was you, and vice versa. Which of these many stories would you like to share? Because whichever one it is, you also had a great postscript in your book, and I'm going to mention that. Anyway, all yours, Baz.
Right. I worked on the first comic relief, and after it, with a few of us standing around having a drink, and Princess Anne was there. And she came over, introduced, and the man said, "This is Barry Took." And I thought, this isn't the moment. So I said, "Hello, ma'am." And that was the end of that. So I rang Tookie and said, "Ha ha." He then rang me and said, I'll be meeting her. And so it's all getting crisscross. But my wife and I went to do, and she's there again, but we're in a lineup. And this man was brilliant. He remembered every name. And he got to us and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Barry Cryer." And she said, "You were Barry Took last time." I thought, oh boy, you're good. And then the saga goes on. Tookie rings me and said, "You couldn't make it up. I was at a do last night and Princess Anne was there." And she said to me, "There's somebody called Barry Cryer, isn't there?" And Tookie said, "Yeah, an old friend of mine." She said, "Can we have a do where both you buggers are there and get you sorted out?" And I thought, I'm not an avid royalist or anything, but boy, there's people that interest me. And that woman's sense of humor, which I'm biased with anybody when they betray the sense of humor, I thought she was great.
Of course. Well, just for the record, Barry Took was one of the writers of the great Round the Horn.
Oh boy!
Again, it's the innuendo, that we love about that program. But late great Barry Took. But you went to his funeral, Baz. Do you know? Can you remember why, according to your book?
No.
You said you went to Barry Took's funeral just to remove any remaining confusion.
Oh, we just swapped the jokes all the time. It was just a joy.
We mentioned earlier ventriloquism because Ray Allen was on the bill with Max Miller. This is one of my favourite jokes, Baz. You claim you don't write jokes, so you must have recycled this from somebody else. But can you remember your joke about the woman ventriloquist who was topless?
I saw a woman ventriloquist who was topless. I never saw her mouth move.
Thank you very much for sharing that one again. And just in case you think, well, all these jokes are so old, I have to say that Baz did ring me up during lockdown and he told me a COVID joke, which I then put on Facebook and it got a lot of response. Can you remember that one, Baz?
Give me a little clue.
The clue is that the aeroplane is coming into land.
Oh, yeah. The outbreak of COVID and everything and the situation, some people were lucky enough to be on a flight home. And the pilot came on as per usual and said, we're at 30,000 feet. The weather is calm. Estimated time of arrival at Heathrow, 5:30 p.m. I am working from home. I've now discovered it's a true story. The pilot was doing the joke.
Oh no, you didn't tell me that.
Yes. No, well, I've got to keep it on the record. I mean, it's a wonderful story to start with, but apparently it's true. You imagine some of the passengers were not that amused at the time. But no, full credit to the pilot for doing that joke, I think.
So you say you're not a comedian, but you're very much a joke collector, I would have said.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm going to try you out on another one. This is a joke from page 116 in your book.
Oh, yes. I must read it sometime.
You should, because it's a very funny book. The cue I'm going to give you here, it's another of my favourite jokes, is that there's a man in a pub slagging off whales.
Oh, this man, after several pints working up, and he suddenly starts fulminating about Wales. He said, only two decent things ever came out of Wales, rugby and prostitutes. And the man next to him is furious. He said, my wife's Welsh. He said, what team does she play for? Very incorrect joke now. There'll be complaints about that joke.
I think
people are looking to be offended, aren't they?
I
told Welsh mates that joke. They loved it.
Now, can we talk about the tricky subject of offence?
Offence.
What's your view on offence?
Well, I do good pompous. I always say there's nothing wrong with being offended, because you then confront the person or whatever happened. You don't ignore them or reject them. You reject them if it was really hate inspired. I agree there. Some speaker or whatever, it's fueling violence and everything. Oh, of course. But just somebody who disagrees with you, take them on. Germaine Greer, I think it happened to her more than once, was no platformed by universities. We're not having her. We don't agree with her. She said, have me, get me up on the platform and have a go at me. It's a democracy. That's what we do. And I couldn't agree more. You don't reject an opponent, you confront them and, game on, the debate is on. You might even change your mind in the debate with them, and it's good.
Wise words, Baz. Thank you very much indeed for that. Alas, though, we're coming to the end of the show. Just a few weeks ago, my guest was the writer David Benedict, and he happened to say that he was a huge fan. He's an addict of, I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. And he pointed out that, you tend, Baz, to be a talking head a lot. And David said that, when producers talk about this, it's not a case of, oh, shall we have Barry, he used to be funny? It's no, Barry is still funny. Oh, I thought that was...
Oh, I'm touched.
I don't want to embarrass you, Baz, but it's how we think.
You've succeeded.
Shall we, in that case, go on with this conversation on Patreon? Because I've got a lot more stuff I want to ask you.
I await eagerly.
In which case, Barry Cryer, thank you very much for joining us this bank holiday weekend.
Mutual pleasure, I hope.
It was for me, certainly, and YouTubers, I know it was for you. We've got to end it here, but if you're a Patreon subscriber, join us. Here's a link for those who can't be with us. Join me, David McGillivray, again next week. My guest is joining me from Los Angeles, and he's going to be talking about a quite incredible miscarriage of justice. Join me then, please. Until then, this is David McGillivray saying... bye.